The rain pounded against the window, each drop a sharp reminder of the storm brewing both inside and outside the small town of Brookhaven. Inside a modest, weathered house at the edge of town, Andrew Cole, a quiet man with graying hair and a kind but weary face, stood staring at an old photo of his late wife, Emily. Her words echoed in his mind, clear as the day she spoke them. "If we can't have our own, maybe we're meant to help someone who needs us." It had been 5 years since Emily passed, but tonight her words felt like a plea. Earlier that day, Andrew had read a news article that shook him to his core. 2 young brothers, Daniel 12 and Logan 8, were left orphaned after a tragic accident. No relatives had stepped forward. The foster care system loomed, threatening to separate the boys. Andrew paced the room, gripping the edges of the newspaper. The world might have forgotten these children, but he couldn't. Not after everything he'd lost. This was his chance to honor Emily's memory, to turn his own pain into something meaningful. But could he do it? "Would you take in 2 boys like this?" Andrew asked aloud, his voice breaking the silence of the room. The photo of Emily offered no answer, but deep down, he knew what she would have said. By morning, Andrew made his decision. With trembling hands, he called the adoption agency. "I want to adopt Daniel and Logan," he said firmly, though his heart raced. The woman on the other end paused. "Mr. Cole, this isn't an easy process, and there might be backlash. Are you prepared for what the town might say?" Andrew exhaled slowly. Brookhaven was small, tightly knit, and notoriously resistant to anything different. But the thought of those boys facing the world alone outweighed any fear of judgment. "Let them talk," Andrew replied, a steely determination settling in his chest. The agency agreed to let him meet the boys first. That afternoon, Andrew found himself standing in a room at the children's home. His palms were sweaty as he glanced around at the brightly colored walls, the faint smell of disinfectant, and the sound of children's laughter echoing faintly in the distance. The door creaked open, and there they were. Daniel entered first, his eyes dark and guarded, his shoulders squared as if carrying the weight of the world. Logan followed closely, clinging to Daniel's shirt, his wide eyes filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Hi," Andrew said softly, kneeling to their level. "I'm Andrew Cole." Daniel said nothing, his gaze piercing as if trying to figure out if this man was just another fleeting presence. Logan whispered something to Daniel, who gave a slight nod before stepping forward. "You're taking both of us?" Daniel finally asked, his voice steady but skeptical. Andrew met his gaze without hesitation. "That's the only way this works," he said firmly. "You and Logan stay together, always." Logan peeked out from behind his brother, his small voice barely audible. "For how long?" "For good," Andrew replied, his words hanging heavy with promise. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Logan took a hesitant step forward, extending his hand. Andrew reached out, meeting the boy's tiny gesture with a firm but gentle grip. That night, as Andrew drove the boys home, he glanced at them in the rearview mirror. Logan's head rested against Daniel's shoulder, and for the first time, Andrew felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't just the start of a new chapter for the boys. It was the start of redemption for him too. What would you do if faced with a decision like Andrew's? Would you take the risk for love and family? Share your thoughts in the comments. Brookhaven was a picture-perfect town with cobblestone streets and flower-lined porches, but for all its charm, it had an unyielding memory. Everyone knew each other's business, and whispers had a way of growing into storms. Andrew Cole had lived here his entire life, but that didn't mean he was immune to the town's judgment. The moment he walked into the diner with Daniel and Logan, heads turned, and the hum of conversation dropped to a murmur. The boys stayed close to Andrew as they walked to a booth near the window. Logan's small hand clung to the edge of Andrew's jacket, while Daniel scanned the room with sharp, guarded eyes. A waitress approached, her smile a little too tight. "Coffee for you, Mr. Cole?" she asked, setting a menu on the table. Her eyes flickered toward the boys. "2 hot chocolates and a coffee, please," Andrew replied, his tone warm but firm. As she walked away, Logan leaned toward Andrew and whispered, "Why is everyone staring?" Andrew glanced around. People were whispering behind their hands. and a few didn't even bother to hide their pointed looks. "They're just curious," Andrew said calmly. "It's not every day they see something new in this town." Daniel, sitting stiffly across from them, wasn't convinced. "They're judging us," he muttered, his voice low but defiant. Andrew's eyes softened. "Let them judge. It doesn't change who we are. You'll see they'll get used to it." But as they left the diner, the whispers followed them out the door. In the parking lot, a man Andrew recognized from church stood leaning against his truck. He crossed his arms as they passed, shaking his head. "2 boys, huh?" the man said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Don't know what you're thinking, Andrew." Andrew stopped, but didn't turn around. "I'm thinking those boys deserve a home," he replied evenly. The man chuckled, his tone dismissive. "Well, good luck with that. This town doesn't change easy." As Andrew led the boys to his truck, his heart weighed heavy. He'd expected resistance, but hearing it spoken aloud in front of the boys stung deeper than he anticipated. The ride home was quiet. Logan stared out the window, his small hand tracing patterns on the glass, while Daniel sat with his arms crossed, his jaw clenched. Andrew glanced at them in the rearview mirror and felt a pang of doubt. But as they pulled into the driveway, he caught a glimpse of the house, the weathered boards, the old swing creaking gently in the breeze, and remembered why he had done this. This house had seen years of love, laughter, and heartache. It could carry the weight of more. Stepping out of the truck, Andrew turned to the boys. "Come on, let me show you something." He led them to the backyard, where the late afternoon sun painted the fields in hues of gold. The air smelled of fresh earth and wildflowers. Andrew pointed to the weathered barn in the distance. "That barn needs fixing," he said with a small smile. "Thought maybe we could turn it into a place for you two. A clubhouse, maybe. What do you think?" Logan's eyes widened with cautious excitement. "For us?" Andrew nodded. "For you. This is your home now. We're going to make it ours together." Daniel didn't say anything, but his gaze lingered on the barn. For a moment, his hard expression softened. Brookhaven might not have been ready for them, but standing there in the golden light of the backyard, Andrew felt the first flicker of hope. This wasn't just about winning over a town. It was about building something that could withstand even the strongest storms. What Andrew didn't know was that the first storm was already on its way, one that would test the strength of their new family and change everything they thought they knew about trust and resilience. The days in Brookhaven started to settle into a routine. Mornings were quiet, with Andrew making breakfast as Logan happily chatted about the day ahead, his small voice filling the once silent kitchen. Daniel, as always, sat quietly, observing. He was polite, distant, and careful, always careful. But as much as Andrew tried to create a safe space, the walls of Brookhaven seemed determined to push back. It began with little things. At the grocery store, Andrew overheard whispers from behind the aisles. "He's biting off more than he can chew," one voice said. Another added, "It's not natural, a man like him raising 2 boys like that." The judgment didn't bother Andrew for himself, but he hated that the boys could feel it. And they did. One Saturday morning, Andrew found Daniel sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the gravel road. "You okay?" Andrew asked, taking a seat beside him. Daniel shrugged. "Some kids from town came by yesterday while you were at the hardware store. They laughed at us, said we didn't belong here." Andrew's heart clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "And what did you say?" "Nothing." Daniel's jaw tightened. "But Logan heard them. He cried all afternoon." Andrew sighed, his hand resting on his knees. "I can't promise people won't talk, Daniel, but I can promise you this. You belong here as much as anyone else in this town. Don't let them take that from you." Daniel didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. He wasn't convinced. The tension reached a boiling point later that week. Logan had taken a liking to playing basketball in the driveway, his laughter bouncing off the walls of the old house. It was the kind of joy that Andrew cherished. But one afternoon, a group of older boys rode by on bikes, their taunts sharp and cutting. "Hey, orphan boy, nice moves. Bet no one ever taught you how to play for real." Logan froze mid-dribble, the ball slipping from his hands. Daniel, who had been watching from the porch, was on his feet in an instant. "Leave him alone," Daniel shouted. his voice cracking with anger. The boys laughed and rode off, but the damage was done. Logan ran inside, tears streaming down his face. Andrew found him sitting at the kitchen table, his small hands clutching the edge. "Why do they hate us?" Logan whispered, his voice trembling. "They don't hate you," Andrew said, crouching beside him. "They just don't understand yet. Sometimes people fear what they don't know." Logan sniffled. "I don't want to go back outside." Andrew's chest tightened. "We'll figure this out," he said softly. "Together." That evening, Andrew sat down with Daniel. "You did the right thing, standing up for Logan," he said. Daniel looked away. "Didn't change anything." "It will," Andrew replied. "But it takes time. People in this town need to see who you are, not who they think you are." Daniel's eyes flickered with something, maybe doubt, maybe hope. "How long is that going to take?" "As long as it needs to," Andrew said firmly. "But we're not giving up." That night the house felt heavier. Brookhaven's whispers weren't just words. They were a storm brewing on the horizon, threatening to break the fragile foundation Andrew was trying to build. But storms, as Andrew knew, could either destroy or cleanse. And this one was coming faster than any of them expected. The skies over Brookhaven darkened early one evening, thick clouds rolling in like an ominous tide. Andrew stood on the porch, the damp breeze brushing against his face. He could feel it. A storm was coming. Inside, Logan was sprawled on the living room floor, drawing with colored pencils, while Daniel sat by the window, his gaze distant. The quiet hum of the radio filled the room, a weather report crackling in and out. "Tornado warnings in effect," the announcer said. "Everyone, stay indoors and seek shelter." Andrew turned off the radio and walked to the center of the room. "Boys, we're heading to the basement. Grab what you need and let's go." Logan scrambled to his feet, clutching his drawing pad, while Daniel took his time, his face unreadable. Together, they followed Andrew down to the cool, dim basement, lit only by the soft glow of a battery-powered lantern. The storm hit with a fury. Wind howled like a wild beast, shaking the house to its core. Rain lashed against the windows, and the distant sound of debris crashing echoed through the chaos. Logan huddled close to Andrew, his small body trembling. "Is the house going to fall down?" Logan whispered. "No," Andrew said firmly, wrapping an arm around him. "This house has stood through worse. So will we." Daniel sat on the steps, watching the shadows dance on the walls. "It's not just the storm," he said quietly. Andrew glanced at him. "What do you mean?" Daniel hesitated before speaking. "People don't want us here. They want us to fail. You think a storm's bad? It's nothing compared to them." Andrew's chest tightened. "Daniel, storms don't last forever. Neither do people's opinions. What matters is that we're here for each other. That's how we win." The boy didn't respond, but Andrew could see the tension in his shoulders ease, if only slightly. Hours later, when the storm finally passed, Andrew led the boys upstairs. The damage was worse than he feared. Part of the roof had caved in, and the backyard was littered with broken branches and pieces of siding. Across the street, their elderly neighbor's roof was completely gone, leaving her belongings exposed to the elements. Andrew didn't hesitate. "Let's get to work," he said, grabbing his toolbox. Logan blinked. "What are we doing?" "We're going to help," Andrew said simply. The three of them spent the day clearing debris and helping neighbors patch up their homes. Daniel, who had initially been reluctant, soon found himself hammering nails and lifting heavy boards alongside Andrew. Logan, though small, pitched in by delivering tools and water to those who needed them. By the evening, the entire street had come together, working side by side to rebuild. The storm didn't just bring destruction, it brought change. Word of Andrew and the boys' efforts spread quickly through Brookhaven. People who had once been cold or indifferent began to warm, offering nods of gratitude or stopping by with small gestures of kindness. Mrs. Grant, the elderly neighbor they had helped, visited a few days later with a basket of muffins. She knelt down to Logan's level, her eyes kind. "You're a little hero, you know that?" she said. Logan beamed, holding the basket proudly as she turned to Daniel. "And you, young man, thank you for fixing my fence. You've got a strong heart." Daniel shifted awkwardly but muttered, "You're welcome." It wasn't just the neighbors who noticed. At the town's next community meeting, the mayor stood up and acknowledged Andrew and the boys by name. "We've all seen what the Cole family did during the storm," he said. "They reminded us what it means to be part of this town. Let's not forget that." The applause was quiet at first, then grew louder. For the first time, Andrew felt a shift, not a complete change, but the start of something better. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Logan leaned against Andrew's side. "We belong here now, don't we?" he asked. Andrew ruffled the boy's hair. "We always have." Daniel didn't say anything, but he stayed close, his presence speaking louder than words. The storm may have passed, but its impact was only beginning to shape their lives and the town they now called home. Weeks turned into months, and Brookhaven began to feel different, not just for Andrew and the boys, but for everyone. The storm had left scars on the town, but it also planted seeds of connection that hadn't been there before. Daniel spent more time outside, working alongside Andrew to repair the barn they had talked about that first night. It had started as a simple project, but over time, it became more than that. The barn was transformed into a space filled with shelves of books, games, and a basketball hoop nailed to one wall. It became the boys' sanctuary, a place they could call their own. One afternoon, as they stood back to admire their work, Daniel turned to Andrew. "It's pretty good," he admitted, his voice tinged with pride. Andrew chuckled, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Pretty good? It's perfect. You did most of it yourself." Daniel shrugged, but for the first time, Andrew caught a flicker of a smile. Logan, meanwhile, had become a familiar face around town. His natural curiosity and cheerful demeanor won over even the most skeptical neighbors. Mrs. Grant often invited him to her garden, where he'd ask endless questions about flowers and plants. "You've got a green thumb," she told him one day, handing him a small pot of daisies. "These are for you, just like your family. They'll thrive if you take care of them." Logan carried the pot home like a treasure, proudly placing it on the porch. Despite the progress, not everyone in Brookhaven was quick to change. At a town meeting, one of the more vocal critics stood up, her voice sharp. "I still don't see why we're celebrating outsiders in this town. They don't belong here, no matter what they've done." Before Andrew could respond, Daniel surprised everyone by standing up. His voice was steady, stronger than anyone had expected. "We didn't ask to belong here," he said. "But we're here, and we're not going anywhere. My brother and I finally have a home, and if you can't see that's a good thing, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong." The room fell silent. Slowly, people began clapping. First Mrs. Grant, then others, until the applause filled the space. The critic sat down, her expression thoughtful. That night, as the family sat together on the porch, Andrew looked at the boys and felt an overwhelming sense of pride. "You know, you two are braver than most people I've ever met," he said. Logan grinned. "Even you?" Andrew laughed. "Especially me." Daniel leaned back, his voice quiet but certain. "You're the one who made this happen. Without you, we wouldn't be here." Andrew shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "No, you're the ones who made it happen. You took a chance on me, just like I took a chance on you." The stars above Brookhaven glittered brightly, as if bearing witness to the journey they had all taken together. The house that had once been filled with silence was now alive with laughter and warmth. As the lights of the town twinkled in the distance, Andrew knew this was only the beginning. The barn would host more memories. The boys would continue to grow, and Brookhaven, slowly but surely, would learn to embrace the family they had once judged. Because storms don't just destroy, they rebuild. And from the rubble of judgment and fear, Andrew and his boys had built something stronger than any house or barn. They had built a home. In the quiet of the evening, with Daniel sketching plans for his next project and Logan humming a tune as he watered his daisies, Andrew sat back and smiled. Emily's words echoed softly in his heart. Maybe we're meant to help someone who needs us. She had been right all along. The Cole family wasn't just a part of Brookhaven now. They were its beating heart. Did this story resonate with you? Maybe it reminded you of a time when you had to stand strong against judgment, or perhaps it made you think about the power of second chances and family. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If this story inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who might need a reminder about the strength of love and resilience. And if you'd like more heartfelt stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Elderly Wisdom. Turn on notifications so you don't miss a single tale of hope, growth, and connection. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family. We'll see you in the next one.